It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar. I'm filling in for Brian. Listen, it's been a big sports summer for New York City. We hosted fans and players from around the globe for the World Cup. We cheered Knicks in 5, especially my wife, during the NBA Finals. So what's next for this city and state? Maybe, dare I say, the Olympics? That's the hope of our next guest, Assemblymember Robert C. Carroll, who's the Assemblymember for District 44 in Brooklyn, who has proposed that New York City puts in a bid to host a dual city Winter Olympics in tandem with the mountainous town of Lake Placid. Also happens to be one of my favorite places in the world, but enough about that. Though New York City has never hosted the games before, Lake Placid has hosted the Winter Olympics twice, in 1932 and 1980. The next available year to put in a bid to host the Winter Games is 2042. That is a long time from now, but steps would need to be taken soon to make it happen. The state is considering it seriously. Last month, Governor Kathy Hochul announced an exploratory committee to investigate the possibility of hosting the games in New York. Assemblymember Carroll is part of that committee, and we are lucky to have him in the studio just 3 feet in front of me to tell us about his vision. Assemblymember Carroll, welcome to WNYC.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kusha.
It's wonderful to have you here. And listeners, we want you here virtually too. What do you think of the Olympics potentially coming to New York? It would be 16 years from now. Would you be in favor, or do you have concerns about how it would impact your community or your tax dollars? Or, and this is for Winter Olympics fans in the audience, how would you plan a Winter Olympics in New York? Do you have questions for Assemblymember Carroll about his planning? Give us a shout. Call or text us at 212-433-9692. That's 212-433-WNYC. Okay, Assemblymember Carroll, why does your proposal include both Lake Placid and New York City? Why not just one or the other?
Well, I don't think either could host a modern Olympics on their own, right? New York City obviously doesn't have mountains. We don't have ski jumps or bobsled tracks. And a modern Olympics has outgrown small alpine towns like Lake Placid. And the Olympics movement has shown that, right? Just last February, Milan Cortina held a joint Olympics together. So that was, a big global city, Milan, hosting the ice events and ceremonies, and Cortina, a classic mountain town that hosted the 1956 Winter Olympics, hosting the alpine and sliding events and Nordic events. That's the concept here. And it actually has happened before that. Even Beijing in 2022, Beijing held the ice events, the ceremonies, as well as the big air event, the freestyle skiing event. And then about 175 miles north of Beijing, they held the sliding events and alpine events and Nordic events. So this model has been kind of brewing in the Olympic movement, and now it's come out into the open. And New York City and Lake Placid can capitalize on it like no other. We have the infrastructure right now, so we could actually host these games, right? We have the arenas, the stadiums, and then we have the exotic infrastructure in Lake Placid because Governor Hochul has smartly maintained those facilities and kept them in world-class shape, and they host international competitions regularly.
Was that your first inspiration for this idea, was seeing that dual city model and thinking, oh, I know a place that could apply?
Well, it happened just a little bit before. So back in 2022, during the Beijing Games, myself and my former colleague, Assemblymember Billy Jones, who represented Lake Placid, we were aware that the state was investing heavily in the legacy infrastructure of Lake Placid for the World University Games that was coming up in 2023. And then we noticed that, hey, in Beijing, they're not actually hosting half of the events in Beijing. They're hosting them about 175 miles away. And, Lake Placid and New York City are a little farther than that. They're about 275 miles away.
Yeah.
But coincidentally, they're the exact same distance apart as Milan and Cortina.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you about that. As somebody who kind of split their lives between upstate and downstate, like my mother lived in Albany, it's where I grew up. My dad lived in New York City. I used to go to Lake Placid to train, do sports like that. It is a long bus ride.
It is.
It is not a lot of airports nearby. Like, there's a lot of car rides that I remember. What would the plan be? That we just bus up and down, or it's like two separate Olympics happening at the same time? Talk me through that.
Well, Well, so I was in Milan Cortina. It was phenomenal. And I took a train to a bus. And it took about 4.5, 5 hours to get there. And, we could use a similar concept. We could say, look, we could focus in. And, I think Governor Kathy Hochul, Senator Gillibrand, others have talked about this. We could focus in on improving rail between New York City and maybe Albany or Saratoga or Fort Edward. It doesn't have to be high-speed rail, but just higher-speed rail. And then that last leg on the Northway, you could use buses, you could use other transportation options. That's the reason why we need this more than 15 years. We're not looking to build stadiums or exotic infrastructure, but how can we improve the lives of everyday New Yorkers across the state? And one of those would be, can we make smart transportation upgrades? Can we make smart housing upgrades? And these are all possible. And the Olympics are much more malleable today. If you look at Milan Cortina, in Milan, they built student housing for their Olympic Village. In Cortina, they just built temporary housing that they took down after the games. And so there's lots of creative things that we could do. That's what this exploratory committee is about, is saying, okay, let's kick the tires over the next year about what are the practical things we can do? What kind of sports infrastructure do we need? I think we have it. And then what kind of transportation, housing infrastructure would we need? And does this make financial sense? Does this make environmental sense? Right? This is the Winter Olympics. We want to be really thoughtful about making sure that we save and preserve winter, that we're leaders there on climate. And I think the really great key to this is that this would be for the first time, at least in America, in a long, long time, where we have urban New Yorkers and rural New Yorkers working together for a singular shared vision that neither could
do alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is a fair, I think, reflection on the state, an interesting one as well, about that kind of dichotomy, the lack of significant opportunity to see the two, upstate, wherever you define it, starting, which I hear a lot of people.
It's hard.
Well, no, it's Albany. That's upstate. No, but, the point is taken that having an opportunity to connect together is important. I want to bring in a caller. We've got Carlo in Brooklyn. Hey, Carlo, welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, good morning. How are you? Hello, Robert.
Hey, Carlo, how are you?
How are you?
Carlo, what's on your mind?
This is just an amazing, amazing opportunity. So I run a group called the New York Building Congress, and our members build transportation, housing, all types of infrastructure, schools, arenas, stadiums, medical, et cetera. And when you think about, I think one of you, I don't remember if it was Robert or you as the host, mentioned people's lives. What an impact this could have on the lives of New Yorkers in terms of construction jobs, economic activity, the upstate downstate connection that hopefully then continues on for decades and decades, investments in transit, both downstate and upstate. It would be great to get universities excited and uplift their sports management programs based on this. Just so much opportunity. And on housing, Bobby, you mentioned the student housing. Think about all the housing that New York is going to be building. What a great way to kick off those projects than to host people visiting Olympic competitors, the press, the media, everything. Plus, we've got Javits, we've got Madison Square Garden, we've got arenas, we've got stadiums.
So, Carlo, I really appreciate those thoughts. It sounds like you are really in favor and see a lot of economic opportunity. Robert, it sounded like you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, no, Carlo, look, I think that is the potential, right? And the potential here is how can we use an Olympics to create deadlines, solve issues for everyday New Yorkers, and also, welcome the world. I think that what FIFA showed us is those spirits of Americanism that I think have forgotten over the last couple of years, which is Americans are optimistic. They are open. They want to bring people, but we've unfortunately allowed in our political environment, we've gotten a cloud over our country of suspicion and of pitting people against each other. And I think big ideas like this can help bring people together, pull them together, and then we can solve the problems that New Yorkers actually need solved. And we have the embarrassment of riches when it comes to the sports and entertainment infrastructure. What we need to do is find solutions for issues of housing, for issues of transportation, and those civic ties that bond us together. That's what this could do. You mentioned that you love Lake Placid. I love Lake Placid, right? The two places I love most in our state is New York City and the Adirondacks. My family's always had a home there. I was married there. I bring my own kids there to this day. It's an amazing place. We should connect them. We should make sure that a kid growing up in Brooklyn or a kid growing up in Saranac Lake realize that they're both equal inheritors of New York's amazing shared history and story.
I'm really happy you brought that up because I think there is the individual experience of it. And I believe we have Marvin in Brooklyn who has a thought on this. Marvin, hi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for showcasing this great idea by my assembly member. Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Marvin. Phenomenal constituent.
One of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet, and then I'll get to my question, is this is an example of long-term thinking, which our country doesn't do well. That Wall Street looks at the bottom line for a quarter, etc. We don't do long-range planning. So just the idea of getting involved in long-range planning with a man young enough to see the whole process through is great. My question is, I'd like you to elaborate a little more on all of these kind of events like FIFA and the Olympics always overpromise in terms of what financial benefits they'll deliver. And we also saw with FIFA that while it was a wonderful, spectacular, excited people, it was unaffordable for ordinary people. People who were avid soccer fans couldn't afford to go to the games or even pay for transportation to New Jersey. So are you already thinking about how do we deal with making the games actually not an economic drain?
Marvin, thank you so much for that question. Let's go ahead.
So I think first, the Olympics in many ways are much more small d democratic than FIFA. There are hundreds of different sporting sessions during the 2.5, 3 weeks of the Olympics. And so what that does is it means it democratizes those events. It makes it much more able to say, hey, we can get affordable tickets for fans and for families to go see those events. Also, because our stadiums in New York City are so large, that also democratized the event. So when I was in Italy, the hockey stadium was 12,000 seats. The figure skating stadium was 9,000 seats. Well, MSG holds 19,000 people for a hockey game. Barclays Center hosts 19,000 people. That makes it much easier to make sure that we can get everyday New Yorkers to see and experience these events. We would also have all of the events, right, in New York City or Lake Placid. That's much different than FIFA, where we only hosted 8 games. And so I think there are many more opportunities to make sure we democratize this event. There's a huge, rich history of also volunteerism around the games, of getting local communities to volunteer to help be ushers and direct people and play information points at fan zones and fan fest. But I also think Governor Hochul and Mayor Mamdani did phenomenally well of kind of creating fan zones and free events. I mean, what they did in Central Park together was spectacular, of having 50,000 fans. What Mayor Mamdani did when he went to Rikers Island to show that, look, sports belongs to everyone, right? We're going to try to widen the aperture and make sure that everyone can participate. And, they really dug deep, both of them, in making sure that whether it was those big kind of events that the media covered, or if it was, hey, at an open street in Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn, we're putting up a big projector, or we're making sure that we're listing bars and restaurants and community events that maybe have a specific hook into a specific immigrant community or team. That was all wonderful. And, that is the vision. I think that I really have to just praise Governor Hochul here, right? She's invested in Lake Placid, realizing how important that is. She's brought this committee together. Those are the things that this committee is going to look at. And I think if we decide to go forward, it's going to be because this is an event for all New Yorkers, and that all New Yorkers will be able to enjoy and participate in.
That small d democratic comment that you made at the beginning about how much wider and more events there were, and I guess if I'm threading the needle here, you're also suggesting that there are more touch points to bring people in, both civically and in other ways as well, to feel like this game is for them. I think that is a wonderful ideal, and that is what I would hope for me personally as a part of a city where I felt like it was part of me welcoming folks to my home. We've got a lot of calls coming in. I would love to go to some folks who might be on the other side right now, because we've heard a lot of folks saying, hey, this is a great idea. Let's hear some concerns. We've got Diana in Bay Ridge. Diana, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. So first of all, I don't think it's a bad idea. I love New York. I love Lake Placid. I love the Olympics. But I just wish everyone would be honest that it's not a money-making thing. We can do it for the vibes, like there's a lot of great reasons to have the Olympics. But while I was on hold, I Googled the last country to make money off the Olympics was Korea in 1988. So the Olympics, by and large, is a money-losing endeavor. That's okay, right? We do things for vibes, for wonderful reasons that aren't money. But I just wish people would be honest about that.
Thank you so much, Diana. What do you think about that?
Look, I think we want to be clear-eyed, Diana, and I agree with you. Now, I do think it's a little bit different. One, the Winter Games is about a third to a quarter the size of the Summer Games. The infrastructure, like I said, right, we have this embarrassment of riches of huge arenas and world-class stadiums in New York City. And then we have this exotic infrastructure like ski jumps and bobsled runs and alpine skiing tracks and Nordic centers that are built and maintained in Lake Placid. And so we don't have to... It's likely we would have to build no new sports infrastructure. That's what the committee is looking at. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't costs, and it's hard to always kind of compare what the exact cost would be. But I do think this World Cup, was successful. If you looked at the numbers, it started slow, but then it looked like, just a second, tourism dollars were up, dollars at bars and restaurants were up, hotel bookings were up. Those were added benefits, and guess what? We did have Giant Stadium. In New Jersey. This idea would be all within New York City or Lake Placid. And so I think that was successful. And so I think the modern way to do this is to not build that new infrastructure. And that's why Governor Hochul has created this exploratory committee, right? Is to explore those exact ideas that you're talking about, Diana, because we want to be financially prudent. We want to be thoughtful about what's going on. And we want to, if we're going to make investments, is it transportation? Is it housing? Is it things that are long-term, that will last much longer than the games themselves?
So to put a point on that, you're saying, I think this might have been a comment about student housing as well. You're building things that would be used for other things in the future.
And it's not my decision or anyone, right? This exploratory committee has got lots of very thoughtful and smart people on it who are involved. We heard from Carlo, who is the head of the New York Building Congress, saying, okay, what can we do? I think there's going to be a lot of people over the next year who are going to be coming together and kicking the tires on this. And then even if it goes from there, right, you would have a bid committee that would again look at those things, right? This would be a long process that I don't think there would be political, business, or civic leaders wouldn't want voices like Diana saying, I want to check your work. I want to make sure that this makes sense for New York. And I think that's really important.
And Diana, we really appreciate you bringing this topic up because there's a lot of texts coming in about the economic side of it as well, fiscally as well. I mean, there's a text here that asks, wouldn't this project have to have government subsidies to make it affordable? Do you have a sense of that?
You mean for the tickets or just to make the event run?
To make the event run, I think is what they're going for.
And I think we have to put those into different buckets, right? Mm-hmm. The state owns the Olympic facilities in Lake Placid. They've invested heavily in them, and they need to maintain them. And they should maintain them. They're unbelievable assets, just like we maintain the subway system, the SUNY system, our roads. The assets in New York City, of course, for the most part, are privately owned. And those would be maintained by the owners of those facilities, the people who own MSG and Citi Field and Barclays Center. The other types of improvements, whether we're looking to try to make slightly higher speed rail between New York and upstate New York, that seems like a government investment and a public benefit. If you're looking to partner with, and again, maybe it's partnering with private universities or SUNY and CUNY for student housing. Maybe it's partnering with nonprofit real estate developers to create affordable housing in New York. Maybe it's creating, again, temporary housing like they did in Italy. Or it could be all of the above. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's one specific answer. Again, that's why I think the governor was very thoughtful to come in and say, let's get people in a room, let's kick the tires on this, let's try to answer some of these questions to decide what would a financially prudent games be? What would a sustainable games be? Can we do this? Do we actually have the infrastructure? Because I don't think anybody wants to go out and build new sports stadiums, right? That's not what this is.
Yeah. Another text, some version of it that I'm seeing come through a lot, has to do with snow. And I know my winters growing up near the Adirondacks are different than they were different than they are today. Here's one that I'm thinking. How much man-made snow would need to be made in order to host the Winter Olympics, and how would New York offset the tremendous number of emissions required to make that snow? You might not have specifics on that
I have
right
some
now.
specifics.
Oh, there you go. Wonderful.
So,
it's wonderful.
So first, the University of Waterloo in Ontario did a study on climate change and past Winter Olympic hosts and who would be able to host the Olympics both mid-century and then out to 2080. And Lake Placid was one of the most climate reliable previous hosts. Actually, by 2080, it was Lake Placid, Lillehammer, and Sapporo that were the only that were thought to be the most climate reliable. So, Adirondack winters have changed, but they are still quite cold. And remember, the Nordic and the alpine events would, for the most part, all be in Lake Placid. Making snow, if people who are historians of the Olympic movement, Lake Placid in 1980 was the first Olympics to use any man-made snow. Some Olympics have used a lot, some have used a little. All since then have used some man-made snow. Luckily, again, because of the leadership at the Olympic Regional Development Authority in Lake Placid, as well as from Governor Hochul, if you go and look at their environmental track record, they use some of the most sustainable equipment in the world when it comes to making snow, and have, their snow guns connected to solar power and ways to really be conservationist minded to make sure that we are preserving and saving winter. And as somebody who loves winter, right, to love winter sports is to love winter, and to realize that winter is a phenomenal season, not a season to dread. You need to be laser focused on how do we preserve our climate? How do we make sure that winter is saved? And I think that this is one way to do that, is to say, getting people focused in on realizing, and I've talked to folks since this committee has been created and have said, look, we need to look at what winter's going to look like in 15 and a half years. We need to think about that, and we need to think about how we can take proactive steps both in New York City and in the Adirondacks and throughout our state to make sure that we meet those goals.
So you're saying proactive, we're not talking about man-made snow there, we're talking about preserving what we have for the future right there?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, that is very interesting, because 16 years from now, I can say, is going to look quite different than even today does. And I think the Winter Olympics are, like you said, something that need to be preserved. It's something that I have pride in, is that Lake Placid, the Adirondacks had the winters that
and
they do.
And it's the birthplace of winter sports in America is Lake Placid.
If you believe in miracles, it's where it can happen. Let's go to Martin in Woodstock, New York. Martin, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm calling from Woodstock, which is about halfway between New York City and Lake Placid. I'm very involved in winter sports. I want to commend the effort for looking at Lake Placid, but I also wanted to say why now. They have been looking at this for a long time. I think it's smart to include Montreal, which is a big, large metropolis, very close to Lake Placid. And what you need is a big city, because there is more media members than athletes. The first one was Torino, where that threshold was highlighted. So 3 countries was at FIFA. The next World Cup has 3 countries: Spain, Morocco, Portugal. I think it would make a great deal of sense, I'm not the only one, to include the northern neighbors. And just Milan was spread out, and some of the faraway athletes did not like that. They felt like they were placed far away and didn't feel like they were part of it.
Martin, thank you so much for that call. It's an interesting point that you bring up. Well, you brought up a couple of points. The one that I want to focus on is Montreal and the neighbor to the north. Have you considered that?
So, Governor Pataki in 2006 actually thought of that idea, looking at Montreal and Lake Placid to possibly host a future Olympics. Look, I think Montreal's a wonderful place. I think that creates a lot of logistical issues because you have a border, because you have two different national Olympic committees that would have to agree on things. I think it is simpler and more elegant to have it be New York City and Lake Placid. I think also, Martin, you said that there were some issues about it being too spread out in Milan Cortina because, of course, it wasn't just 2 sites. It was about 5 sites in total that hosted games. This idea would most likely really be 2 sites, you know, and I think that makes a simpler, more elegant. It's also all within the same state. Governor Hochul is, a huge booster of this and brought everyone together. She could do that because she is the governor of our state. And I think that for right now, this committee, there are a lot of people on this committee. They will look at a lot of ideas. But I think the main focus right now and what Governor Hochul has asked committee members to do is to look at this concept as New York City, Lake Placid, and using Milan Cortina as a blueprint. It's not going to be exactly the same, but to say, okay, they've blazed a trail here. What can we do? How can we build on that? How can we make it even more spectacular and fulfill the needs that New Yorkers need fulfilled?
Got it. So, Robert, we're running on the clock. I still have 2 quick questions for you.
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah. So, no, you're doing great. What would you say to a New Yorker who maybe doesn't care about sports, doesn't really care about the spirit of the Olympics, who is really worried about disruptions to their community, distraction from more local issues? How would the Olympics still benefit them?
So, this is a much more manageable Olympics than the Summer Games, which we bid for in 2012. It's about 3,000 athletes in the Winter Games. It's about 12 to 13,000 athletes in the Summer Games. Again, the sports infrastructure in New York City and in Lake Placid is there. So those buildings, those stadiums, they're hosting things right now, and it's not disrupting your day. I'm not saying there won't be more people and more things, but it's also in February, which is the lowest level of tourism in our city. Yeah. So I don't think the inconvenience is going to be huge. Mm-hmm. And also, those of us who don't love sports, I love sports, but sports is such a powerful driver for civic engagement. We still talk about Jesse Owens in 1936. Yeah. We still talk about Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Mexico Games, talking about black civil rights and holding their fists in the air.
Yeah.
We still
I just made a reference to
Miracle on Ice, right?
Totally.
And talking about these are dotted throughout, and they help galvanize people. And also, we're the greatest city in the world in New York City. We should host the greatest single sporting event, and that is the Olympics. This is the prudent, more practical version of the Olympics. We have the opportunity to do that. And as somebody who loves New York City and Lake Placid, I think that we should take that shot.
Okay, and my last question for you: what Olympic sport would you be the most excited to watch in New York City?
In New York City, I think figure skating. You don't see it every day. I saw Alyssa Liu in Milan Cortina. In Lake Placid, downhill skiing is unbelievable.
I think figure skating might be my answer as well for in New York City. That would be pretty great. That's all the time we have. My guest has been New York State Assemblymember Robert Carroll. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.